My name is Stella Marsh. I'm 29 years old, and I run a small but profitable interior design firm in Austin, Texas. We work with high-end residential clients, the kind of people who spend more on a kitchen renovation than most families earn in a year. I built it from nothing. Literally nothing. A laptop, a folding table in a studio apartment, and about $400 left in my bank account after my brother walked away with everything else. That was 3 years ago. Last Thursday, he showed up at my office with my mother. They sat down across from me like they were doing me a favor just by being there. And my mother looked me in the eye and told me I was going to hand over 40% of my business or she would make sure my biggest client never worked with me again. I smiled. I told her I understood completely. But before I tell you what happened next, I need to go back to the beginning. Because none of this makes sense without it. I grew up in a town outside of Dallas with my older brother Preston and our parents. My mother, Linda, always had a way of making you feel like you were the lucky one, just for having her in your life. My father works long hours and mostly stayed quiet. Preston was her favorite, and nobody pretended otherwise. He was charming, good-looking, always had some new idea he was excited about. Growing up, I thought that was just who he was. I didn't realize until much later that the ideas were never really his. When I was in college, I started doing freelance design work for extra money. Small stuff at first, helping a professor redo her home office, putting together mood boards for a friend's new apartment. I was good at it. Not just technically good, but the kind of good where clients called me back and referred their friends. By my junior year, I had a steady stream of work coming in and a name for myself in a small but real way. Preston noticed. He called me one evening during my senior year, more excited than I'd heard him in a long time. He had a connection, a developer who was building luxury condos on the east side of Dallas and needed someone to handle the interiors for the model units. 10 units. If it went well, the developer would hire us for the whole building. Us. That word should have been my first warning. Preston said he could handle the business side, the contracts, the invoicing, the client relationship, if I handled the design work. He said it like he was offering me something. Like his presence at the table was the thing that made it possible. I was young and I trusted him, so I said yes. For 6 months, I worked on those model units. I sourced every piece of furniture, selected every material, stayed up until 2 in the morning redesigning floor plans when the developer changed his mind. Preston handled the emails, showed up to meetings, talked about our vision with a confidence I genuinely admired back then. When the developer praised the work, Preston smiled like a man accepting an award he'd earned. The day we closed the full building contract, I found out what Preston had put in writing. The agreement named his company, not mine. His LLC, which he had formed 3 weeks after I agreed to work with him. There was no mention of me except as a subcontractor. The percentage breakdown gave him 65% of the fee. When I confronted him, he shrugged. He actually shrugged. "You're the designer," he said. "I'm running the business. That's how it works." I told him that wasn't what we agreed to. He said we never had anything in writing, so there was nothing to disagree about. Then he said something I haven't forgotten since. He said, "You're good at what you do, Stella. But you need people like me to make it real." I called my mother that night. I was shaking. I told her everything. The contract, the percentage, what he said. I thought she would be angry. I thought she would at least be fair. She sighed in that way she had, the one that made you feel childish for being upset. "Preston has been working on this for months," she said. "He brought you the opportunity. You should be grateful instead of making it about money." "It's not about money," I said. "It's about him taking credit for what I did." "You're being dramatic," she said. "You always do this." That was the last real conversation I had with my family for a long time. I withdrew from the contract. Preston finished the building without me. He hired someone else, paid them less, and the interiors were average at best. I heard later the developer wasn't happy with the work, but by then I had already left Dallas. I moved to Austin with everything I owned in my car. I had a design degree, a portfolio, and a very clear understanding of what I would and would not accept from people. The first year was hard in the way that hard years always are. Quietly, consistently, without any dramatic low point you can point to later. I took every job that came my way. I designed a coffee shop that ended up being featured in a local magazine. I found a mentor, a woman named Frances who had been running her own firm for 20 years and who told me, bluntly, that I had real talent but no business instincts yet. I listened to everything she said. By year 2, I had a waiting list. By year 3, I had a small team, 2 junior designers and an office manager, and a client roster that included some of the most recognizable names in Austin real estate. I wasn't famous, but I was solid. The kind of solid that doesn't happen by accident. My mother knew I was doing well. I don't know how exactly. I wasn't posting much on social media and I had stopped calling. But she knew. People talk. Preston, it turned out, had run into some difficulty. His consulting business, the one he'd built on the back of that Dallas developer's project, had not gone well after I left. He'd taken on a partner who turned out to be unreliable, lost a major contract, and was now, according to what I pieced together from distant relatives, essentially starting over. He had a new venture, something in commercial real estate consulting. I didn't think much about it. People rebuild. I had nothing against him rebuilding. I just didn't need to be part of it. And then one Tuesday afternoon in October, my assistant knocked on my office door with that specific look on her face, the one that means something is off. "There are 2 people in the lobby," she said carefully. "They say they're family." I set down my pen. "Did they give names?" She nodded. "Your mother and your brother." The room felt different after she said that. Smaller somehow, even though nothing had changed. I sat there for a moment and made a deliberate choice to keep my voice even. "Put them in the small conference room," I said. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." I used those 10 minutes well. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. My heart was going fast and my hands felt strange. But I knew something they didn't. And I held on to that the way you hold on to something solid when the ground feels unsteady. When I walked into the conference room, my mother looked the same. Same posture. Same small, self-possessed smile. Preston had filled out a little, dressed better than I remembered. He looked at the room, the framed project photos on the walls, the view of downtown through the window, with the expression of someone doing a quiet calculation. "This is impressive," my mother said. She said it lightly, the way people say something when they've decided to be gracious. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Preston leaned forward. "We came to talk business. I didn't invite you." "We're family," my mother said. "You stopped being available as family 3 years ago," I said. "You don't get to walk back in and claim that title when it's convenient." My mother's expression shifted slightly, not hurt, exactly, more like recalibration. She looked at Preston. He opened a folder he brought with him and pushed a set of papers across the table. I didn't touch them. "What is this?" I asked. "A partnership proposal," Preston said. "My new firm and your studio, combined resources, my developer relationships and your design reputation. It's a natural fit." 40%, my mother said quietly. She said it the way people say something they've already decided. "You want 40% of my company." "It's not taking," Preston said. "It's a merger. You get access to my network, my clients. Developers who are looking for exactly what you offer." I looked at the papers without picking them up. "No," I said. My mother's voice changed. It got quieter, which was always worse than when she raised it. "Stella," she said, "I think you should consider this carefully." "I have." She folded her hands on the table. "I spoke to Helen Baxter last week." Helen Baxter was my largest client. She had hired me to oversee the full interior design of her family's new estate. A 2-year project, nearly the entire year's revenue for my firm, and a referral source that had already brought me 3 other significant clients. "Helen and I have been friends for years," my mother continued. "She respects my opinion a great deal, and if I told her that I had serious concerns about your professional conduct, about certain decisions you made early in your career, I think that would affect her confidence in working with you." The room was completely quiet. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like. It wasn't just anger, though anger was there. It was something older and more specific. The particular feeling of recognizing a pattern you had hoped was behind you. My mother had done this my whole life. Not with clients and business leverage, but with friendships, with family events, with the slow application of social pressure until people bent the way she wanted. She was very good at it. She had always been very good at it. She had always been very good at it. Preston spread his hands. We're not trying to threaten you, Stella. We're offering you an opportunity. But business is about relationships, and relationships can be fragile. Sign the papers, my mother said, and this conversation stays between us. I picked up the folder. I turned a few pages slowly, the way I'd been told to, deliberately, without expression. Then I set it down and looked at both of them. You know what, I said. I think this deserves a proper conversation, with more people at the table. Preston raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? I have a team, I said. Senior designers, my legal consultant, a few advisors I work with regularly. If we're talking about a partnership of this size, they should be part of the discussion. It would actually make the whole thing more legitimate, easier to move forward. My mother looked at Preston. He nodded slowly. That's reasonable, he said. I'll set something up for Friday evening, I said. End of day, we can do it here. My mother smiled, that small, confident smile that I'd spent years trying to earn and eventually stopped wanting. Good, she said. That's very mature of you. I walked them to the elevator. Preston turned back once. I knew you'd come around, he said, not unkindly. Just like a fact. I'll see you Friday, I said. The elevator doors closed. I stood in the hallway for a moment, and then I went back to my office and I called my attorney. Her name is Gwen, and she had been my legal consultant for 2 years. She was calm, methodical, and exceptionally good at her job. I told her everything in about 12 minutes. She asked 3 questions. Then she said, I can have what you need by Thursday. That's all I need, I said. I had been prepared for this possibility for longer than anyone knew. Not because I had predicted this specific moment, but because 3 years earlier, when I was first building the firm, Frances, my mentor, had sat me down and said something that stuck with me. She said, in this business, your reputation is everything, and the people who want to take things from you will always come for your reputation first. Protect it the way you protect your contracts. I had taken that seriously. I kept records of everything: client communications, project documentation, financial agreements. When Preston first started making noise through distant relatives about his new venture and how well it was going, I had quietly asked Gwen to run a background check, not because I expected anything specific, just because Frances had taught me to look before something became a problem. What Gwen found was not small. Preston's previous partnership, the one that had collapsed, had ended because of a financial dispute with his former partner. His partner had filed a civil complaint alleging that Preston had redirected client payments to a personal account. The complaint was eventually settled out of court, which meant it never became public record in any obvious way. But it existed, and Gwen had it. There was also a pattern with his new venture. 2 clients who had paid retainer fees and then found that the projects were stalled, the communication disappeared, and the money was difficult to trace. None of this was my business until the moment he walked into my office and asked for 40% of my company with the threat attached. Friday came. My conference room was full. Gwen was there, along with my 2 senior designers and my business accountant. I had also quietly asked Frances to attend, and she sat in the corner in her particular way, still, observant, saying nothing. My mother arrived first. She looked around at the room with mild surprise. More people than she'd expected, I think. Preston came in a few minutes later, carrying the same folder, wearing the same confident expression. He shook hands with people he didn't know. He laughed easily. He was good at this part, had always been good at this part, the entering a room, the taking up of space with warmth. I waited until everyone was seated. Thank you for coming, I said. I want to be very clear about why we're here. Preston and my mother came to my office on Tuesday and presented a proposal to acquire 40% of my firm. They indicated that if I declined, my mother would contact my largest client and make damaging false statements about my professional conduct. The room went very still. My mother's expression didn't change immediately, but something moved behind her eyes. That's not. Preston started. I'm not finished, I said quietly. Gwen opened a folder and placed 2 documents in the center of the table. Before accepting any partnership, I continued, I had a thorough background check conducted. What it found is relevant to everyone in this room. The first document was a summary of the civil complaint. I didn't read it aloud. I let people look at it. I watched Preston's face as they did. His confident expression didn't disappear all at once. It dissolved, slowly, starting around his eyes. "That was settled," he said. His voice was different now. "Thinner, it was," I said, privately. "Which is why your new clients didn't know about it." I placed the second document on the table. It was a letter from two of his current retainer clients who had been trying for weeks to get answers about their projects and their money. They had agreed, after speaking with Gwen, to formalize their concerns in writing. My mother looked at the papers and then at me, and for the first time in my life, I watched her recalibrate without knowing what to recalibrate toward. "This is a family matter," she said. Her voice was still controlled, but the authority was gone from it. It was just words now. "It stopped being a family matter when you threatened to lie to my client," I said. "Everything that happens from here is a business matter." Preston pushed back from the table. "We're leaving." "You can," I said. "But I want to be clear about what happens next. I've already spoken to Helen Baxter. I called her on Wednesday morning, before you could. I told her everything. She appreciated the transparency. We're still under contract." My mother's mouth opened slightly. "I've also contacted the two clients in that document," I said, nodding to the second set of papers. "They've been connected with a dispute resolution attorney. That's their decision to make, not mine. And I've sent a formal cease and desist to both of you regarding any contact with my clients or my employees." Preston was standing now. He looked, for the first time, like someone who had run out of moves. "You can't do this to family," my mother said. I looked at her for a long moment, not with anger. I had moved past anger sometime in the middle of Wednesday night when I couldn't sleep, and I sat with everything that had happened and everything that hadn't happened over 3 years of silence. I looked at her the way you look at something you finally fully understood. "You taught me something a long time ago," I said. "You taught me that family is the people who show up. You didn't show up for 3 years, and then when you did show up, it was with a threat. So I think we have very different definitions of that word." Neither of them said anything. They left without the folder. Frances waited until the room had cleared out, and then she stood up slowly and looked at me. "Good," she said. That was all. But coming from her, it was enough. That night, I drove home alone, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while before going inside, not because I was upset, exactly. More because something that had been unfinished for 3 years was finally finished. And it turns out that feeling doesn't land the way you expect it to. It's not triumphant. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of setting down something heavy you'd been carrying so long you forgot it was there. I called Helen the next morning just to check in. She was warm, completely unbothered, slightly entertained if I'm honest. "Darling," she said, "I've been in business for 30 years. I know the difference between someone who is good at what they do and someone who is trying to undermine them. You have nothing to worry about." Preston has not reached out since. My mother sent one text 3 days later. It said, "I hope you're happy." I thought about that for a while, whether it was meant as sarcasm or a genuine question or something else. Then I put my phone down and went back to work because there was a client waiting on a revised proposal and my team had questions about a tile selection, and the afternoon light was coming through the window at exactly the angle I love. And my office felt like mine in the way that it sometimes just does. Settled and real and built by no one other than me. I am happy. Not in spite of anything, just on its own terms. That's the only kind of happy I'd ever trusted anyway. I've thought a lot about what Preston actually believed when he walked into my office that day. I don't think he thought he was doing something monstrous. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. He probably genuinely believed that his presence, his charm, his ability to walk into a room and make people feel at ease was worth 40% of something I had spent 3 years building alone. He had always been rewarded for that quality. Our mother had always told him it was enough. That's not malice. That's something more ordinary and in some ways harder to reckon with. It's what happens when someone is never asked to develop anything beneath the surface. No real skill, No real accountability, no honest understanding of what it costs to build something from nothing. The world kept confirming his self-image, and so it never changed. I think about the night in my parents' living room when I stood there and told my father that Preston had claimed my work as his own, and my father sighed and told me I was overreacting. He wasn't a cruel man. He just didn't have the framework to understand what I was saying, because in his mind, the person who talked about the work was the person who did the work. He'd never watched me code until 2 in the morning. He'd never seen the hours. He only saw Preston presenting it. That's on me, too, in a way. I hadn't learned yet how to make my work visible. I thought the work would speak for itself. It doesn't, not always. You have to learn to be your own witness. What Frances gave me, more than any specific piece of business advice, was that understanding. She taught me to document, to protect, to anticipate. Not out of paranoia, but out of self-respect. She understood that talented people often underestimate how much others will take if you leave the door open. Closing that door isn't cynicism. It's just maturity. The cause and the effect in this story are almost too clean to be believed, but they're real. Preston spent years building an identity on other people's labor without ever developing the substance to back it up. Eventually, the gap between image and reality became a financial disaster. And when it did, his instinct was to reach for someone else's work again, mine. Because that's the only move he knew. And I had spent those same years doing the opposite, building quietly, documenting carefully, finding people like Gwen and Frances who were honest with me even when it was uncomfortable. When Preston finally came for what I'd built, I wasn't caught off guard. Not because I was lucky, but because I had done the work of being ready. I'm not angry at my mother anymore, either. That surprised me when I noticed it. I think I stopped being angry when I realized she had made her choice a long time ago, and the choice wasn't really about me. It was about the story she needed to believe about her family. Some people cannot afford to see clearly because seeing clearly would require them to change. That's a hard thing to watch in someone you love. But it's not something you can fix for them. What I know is this: integrity compounds. Every decision I made to do the right thing when no one was watching, to leave a bad contract instead of fighting dirty, to build again from scratch instead of cutting corners, to call Helen before my mother could. All of it added up to something. Not because the universe rewards honesty on a schedule, but because the habits you practice become the instincts you have when the moment arrives. I had good instincts on a Thursday afternoon in October because I had spent 3 years practicing them on ordinary days when nothing was at stake. That's the only thing I'd want anyone to take from this. You don't become the person who handles the hard moment during the hard moment. You become that person in all the small moments before it.